Hello, and thank you all for joining the AWIN Client Partnerships team as we share and discuss 10 key trends we've witnessed across the AWIN network in March. My name is Rosalind Beresford, and I'm the Client Partnerships Director here at AWIN UK. And I'm joined by Joelle Hillman, who's our Retail and Travel Client Partner, and Alex Palmer-Yee, who's our Telco and Finance Travel Partner. The world as we know it really has been turned upside down over the past few weeks. Everyone is panic buying, the travel industry is in freefall, and global lockdown seems to be the new norm. Such wholesale changes can't help but filter through to every facet of our lives, especially consumer buying habits. So what we wanted to analyse and share with you today is how the disruption caused by coronavirus has manifested itself in the affiliate programs we manage. So we've taken a deep dive into the AWIN data to see what key trends jumped out. You can ask questions as we discuss the trends, and we've put aside some time at the end to be able to answer them. You do so by using the small toolbar that should appear in the middle of the screen and select the Show Q&A icon. A chat bar will then open up at the side of the screen for you to type your questions or comments. And you can also up or down vote other questions submitted by others. So to kick things off, I'm going to hand over to Alex to set the scene and remind us of some of the key dates over the past few weeks and take us through the first of the trends from across the telco and finance sectors.
Thank you, Ros. So, as Ros said, it's been an extremely unique month. And so when we looked at all the data across the network, we were mindful of looking at how key dates impacted the various sectors that we work across. So it probably isn't sort of anything new to you, but these are sort of the key dates that we particularly focused around, such as the 11th of March, when the World Health Organization declared the COVID-19 epidemic as a pandemic, the 16th of March, when the UK government asked to refrain from unnecessary travel, and then following that, the closures of pubs, restaurants and schools on the 20th, and the sort of stay-at-home and shops closures on the 23rd. So one thing that we're definitely doing a lot more of is spending a lot of time on our home broadband connections. So the first bit of data we looked at was at the home broadband market. Now, for context, March is usually a slow month for broadband. However, following the initial advice and request to work from home by the government on the 16th of March, we saw definitely a steep increase in home broadband sales, which culminated of a peak of over 4,000 orders on the 19th, only a few days after that request. The biggest, and which was the biggest day in 2020, outstripping any of the January sales days, which tend to be the usual Q1 peaks for the sector. However, the pressure on internet service providers is definitely being felt, and we've definitely seen less pushers within the channel as ISPs focus on delivering as many orders as possible. Since we released the article, I've added a few more extra sort of days onto the graph, which has a look at sort of the additional spike that we see on the 23rd of March, and sort of which was driven by the deepening lockdown following the address the Prime Minister made to the nation to request everyone to stay at home. Following that, Openreach, who power a huge chunk of the infrastructure, have also now announced additional protections for its engineers, which now could limit the new lines and upgrades to fibre if they require home visits. And as a result, we are now seeing delays in the fulfilment of orders. ADSL shell had been falling for quite some time there, but there could obviously be implications here as faster internet becomes more important. So we expect the sector to the home broadband sector to go and see some declines over the next few weeks. However, there potentially is an opportunity here. Now, that there's obviously the whole mobile broadband sector, which admittedly, if you'd asked me earlier in the year, I wouldn't have said that mobile broadband would have seen its massive sort of resurgence this year, and maybe it was something for 2021. However, with people in lockdown and looking to get faster internet, mobile broadband is increasingly looking like a better option for consumers. We've looking at this graph here, which is Google Trends data, showing sort of search traffic in the UK over the past 12 months. Searches for mobile broadband have never been higher, and so I think what I would urge is providers that are able to offer 4G or 5G connections to potentially look at pushing this activity into the channel to supplement the downturn in home broadband, and for publishers that work in the broadband space to consider pushing this category. There's obviously been changes in how we are using our internet connections and how we're using our devices. Now, a few years ago in 2016, this graph was widely circulated as mobile device usage online overtook desktops. And this has remained a status quo and shouldn't be any information that is new to anyone listening to this call. So what have we seen on the network? Well, with people staying indoors, the proportion of traffic from mobile devices is beginning to shift to traditional non-mobile devices. From Monday the 16th of March 2020 to Monday the 23rd of March, we saw the proportion of online traffic for non-mobile devices increase to 42% comparative to 33% in the same week the previous year. The convenience of mobile, which powers a lot of commuter-based browsing, has now been replaced by us using our largest screens on our laptops or desktop computers, potentially suggesting that when given a choice, people still prefer a large screen with a keyboard and mouse as opposed to a mobile phone. I will now pass over to Joelle, who will talk about some of the trends that we've been seeing in the travel sector.
Thank you, Alex. It'll be no surprise for anyone to learn the whole travel sector has seen a continued decline year to date. As we entered 2020, consumer confidence was up and we saw January travel sales up 22% versus January last year. However, as the COVID-19 news and virus began to move across the globe, we ended the month of February up just slightly at 2%. It's worth noting 2020 was also a leap year, so we saw an extra whole day's trading this February versus February last year. March, however, was where we began to see the real impact, ending the month down minus 54% versus last year. This means that Q1 2020 was down 9% versus Q1 in 2019. This graph shows the month of March specifically, looking at performance by day versus March 2019. The blue line depicts the year-on-year performance change, which unfortunately is mostly down, and that gap grew throughout the month. I have a few key dates I want to call out. Firstly, March, it's a bit of an anomaly, but the 9th of March, you can see a 12% increase in the travel space year on year. This is the result of one taxi company specifically running an app download campaign, which saw downloads increase 900%. This was just 1 week before the live government announcements putting restrictions on travel. On the 24th of March, the UK Foreign and Commonwealth Office advised against all non-essential worldwide travel for a period of at least 30 days. And on that day, we saw travel performance drop by 82% versus the previous year. And finally, as we get to the end of March, on the 30th of March, we saw further travel announcements, including the groundings of EasyJet's whole fleet. Unfortunately, we ended the month on a 96% decline in the travel sales across our network. On Monday, the 16th of March, Boris began one of his first of many live updates to the British public. His first message to us all was to refrain from all unnecessary travel. Looking at our travel landscape specifically that week, we saw unfortunate but unsurprising declines across all subsectors within the travel industry. This graph shows total sales performance, dark grey showing this year, with the light grey showing last year, and the blue boxes demonstrate the year-on-year decline each week by each subsector. As you can see, airlines and local holidays took the biggest hit, both down 98% versus last year. This was shortly followed by trains, airport parking, cruises, and tourist attractions, all down plus 90% year-on-year. Travel agencies and taxi application downloads have seen slightly less of a decline, but still significant at minus 67% and minus 5% retrospectively comparative to 2019. Data from one travel agent that passes AWIN stay date information through our custom parameter tracking allowed us to analyse the lag time between booking date and stay date for the actual trip. Whilst the number of bookings for this retailer specifically were down 70% in March 2020 versus March 2019, some customers were still booking. What we found was that the time between booking and stay date had increased by 33% in terms of the number of days compared to that in March 2019. Consumers are still keen to get that holiday in the diary and have something to look forward to, but travellers are coming to terms with the fact that they may have to wait longer for the holiday than what they had to last year. I will now pass you back to Alex to talk us through the travel insurance performance specifically.
Thank you, Joelle. So with travel bookings being severely impacted, I guess it's always worth looking at the impact of the travel insurance to go with it. And so with this graph, I've looked back a little bit further than March to go and just see the lead up to the peaks and falls that we've seen. So the market started seeing increase as COVID-19 hit more countries. With at the end of February, the Foreign Office began to issue guidance on limiting travel to a number of regions and countries. Since then, travel insurance has continued to rise as we moved toward a pandemic being declared. And as we moved towards there, as we moved past that, it peaked. However, with new policies no longer covering the existing pandemic, many advertisers actually sought to pause the issuing of new policies, or at least reduce activity within the channel. And now, similar to what we've seen in the travel sector in general, we now see sales hover barely over zero. Looking at other insurance products, just for context, so these are some trend lines for life, car, home, and pet insurance. They have seen impacts, but obviously nothing as spiky as travel insurance. Generally, life insurance has been relatively flat, but has seen some recent increases. However, the large insurance products, car and home insurance, which tend to be a majority of the sector, have started to see decreases. What we potentially look at this is because car insurance purchases tend to be linked to new drivers on the road, as well as new car purchases, and home insurance purchases tend to be linked to people purchasing new properties, which of course are now being limited due to social isolation. So the finance sector is definitely also seeing quite a negative impact as a result of the social isolation that we're seeing, but obviously it's not as severe as it has been within travel insurance. So without the ability to travel, a lot of us are resorting to other ways to stay closer. Our living rooms have now become our offices, but also the pub and the family room powered by the power of online. I definitely use the app House Party to go and keep in touch with a lot of friends, and lots of people are joining me, with it now sort of topping the App Store charts with over 2 million downloads in 1 week, and the other video conferencing app Zoom in second. Now, these apps allowed many of us to celebrate Mother's Day with a Sunday video lunch call. And then in addition to this, obviously you weren't able to go and purchase gifts through retail stores due to the closures. We definitely saw obviously a lot more people sending gifts online. In fact, on AWIN network data saw a 54% year-on-year increase in the gifts and flowers category for the whole of March, which actually put it in third spot in terms of volume across the whole retail sector. However, to look at the rest of the retail sector, Joelle will now delve a little bit deeper into those trends.
Thank you, Alex. So this graph shows each subsector within the wider retail landscape. Again, the dark bar demonstrates sales performance this March versus the light grey bar demonstrating performance from last year. Those blue boxes call out the percentage increase or decrease versus March 2019. One of the biggest subsectors up year on year is white goods. This is up a huge 375% versus the same month last year. Interestingly, we saw this trend emerge right from the very beginning of March, prior to any government advice to stay home. We've spoken to a few of these retailers, and this is a direct trend related to consumers purchasing additional fridges and freezers in preparation for stockpiling. The UK is certainly an animal-loving nation, and pet care is another niche sector we have seen up. Again, a huge amount at 170% versus last year. As we continue to stay home, consumers are stocking up on pet essentials, including pet food and other medicines and care products. Unsurprisingly, the pharmaceutical sector online is also up year on year by 152%. This is another sector that we saw growth right from the very beginning of March. However, the product mix causing this growth has shifted throughout the month. Looking at one retailer specifically that passes AWIN product level data, we were able to see that in early March, hand sanitizers, as well as toilet rolls, were some of our top performing products. However, later in the month, we saw consumers move from preventative measures to more treatment and cure-based purchases, such as cough medicines and vitamins. Clothing is, of course, one of the biggest sectors in the retail landscape, and unfortunately, it is seeing a decline, slightly at minus 11% year on year. Interestingly, women's wear is seeing the biggest impact, down minus 18%, followed by children's wear, down 6%, and menswear is up, but very slightly at plus 3%. Sportswear, however, continues to grow and perform throughout the whole month of March. Next, we want to run through what's happening on the high street as well as what's happening online. So we saw on Monday, the 23rd of March, that Boris announced the closure of all physical stores that do not sell essential items. However, on the weekend prior to this announcement, we saw some well-known department stores, as well as clothing and beauty stores, take matters into their own hands to protect the staff and the general public and shut earlier than what was enforced. For those retailers, it looked like the decision really paid off and consumers to continue to support these brands online. From Friday the 20th through to Monday the 23rd, the weekend prior to enforced store closures, Awin saw general site traffic for all department stores, clothing and beauty down 6% versus the same weekend last year. However, looking at that handful of high street stores that decided to close early before the enforced closures, Awin actually saw the traffic for these sites up 12% versus the same weekend last year. It seems that consumers really are staying loyal and supporting their favourite brands, especially those that are making brave business decisions during this time. On Friday the 20th, we also saw the enforcement of gyms to close. On that weekend, from the 20th to the 22nd, we saw sales of fitness products up 53% versus the same weekend the previous month. The average basket value also saw huge increases by 42%. Those brands that saw the biggest increase in terms of number of orders were specialised in products such as cross trainers, treadmills, exercise bikes, rowers, and general strength equipment. Many of these brands were offering free home delivery across the UK, paired with alternative payment methods such as Klarna, which allowed these shoppers to spread their costs around several payments. Many of these sites, however, are now experiencing some downtime as they aim to process the influx of orders. We've also seen a rise in online content focused on supporting those that continue to want to work out at home. This includes the body coach Joe Wicks running a live fitness class every morning at 9 a.m. in a bid to be the nation's PE teacher, as well as some tailored workouts for the senior community amongst us. Looking at Google search statistics, we've seen a decline in searches for the term gym workout, alongside a huge surge in the term home workout. Queries for home workout specifically is up 90% versus the previous 30 days. I will now pass you over to Roz, who will run through some of the products that are keeping us busy and entertained at home outside of just gym equipment.
Thanks, Joelle. So, as well as keeping fit, what else have we been doing at home? Well, as you can imagine, online entertainment services are booming. Last week, Awin data showed video on demand orders are up a huge 174% versus the same few days last year. And online gaming is up a huge 237%. On a smaller scale, but still significant in terms of increase in consumer demand, we've seen electronics and gadgets up 11% versus the same time last year, and PC and video games up by a quarter. However, with Bloomberg reporting that Nintendo is facing a global Switch shortage as a result of the outbreak, it's good to see that consumers are also turning off their screens to keep occupied. Books and subscription sales are also up by a third, and we're seeing other increases in certain niche retailers within the craft and hobby sector, and gardening in particular. When looking at the whole month of March, one plant and seed retailer saw a 400% increase in volumes compared to 2019, which marries up with a 5-fold increase Google has seen in the search term grow your own. The change in consumer behaviour across these retail subsectors is also sparking interest in advertisers developing affinity partnerships with other brands from across our client portfolio. With some clients seeing good traffic but reductions in conversion rates, and others having too much traffic to be able to meet demand, alternative options are starting to be considered. Directing traffic to a non-competing but complementary retailer could be a good way to help support customers and other UK businesses in these unprecedented times. Do let us know if you'd like to find out more about developing affinity partnerships with other Awin advertisers. One other interesting point to add is that from the toys, games and book sector, where on the Friday the schools shut, we saw an increase of 213% compared to the same day last year, and this jumped again on the first Monday the kids were at home to 286%. So I think parents obviously needing a little bit of help there, which I can definitely attest to. So we all want food delivered. In March, we undertook analysis looking at grocery activity, and we have a larger article on that, which showed that despite increases, it still hadn't reached the peaks that we saw at Christmas. And so what we wanted to do was look at the takeaway food sector and see if it told a similar story. So even though local restaurants are flocking to Just Eat, Deliveroo, Uber Eats, others are using B2B platforms such as Slurp to provide a direct delivery service under their own brand. When looking at data across a number of Awin delivery brands, we're still yet to see the volumes over the past 2 weekends to match the spike of Valentine's Day. So when we first looked at this data in the article, Friday the 20th was the second largest day of the year behind Valentine's Day. However, having a look at the data again, this last weekend has now overtaken this, but this time Saturday being higher than the Friday. However, the Saturday is still 12% lower than Valentine's Day. So it'll be interesting to see how this changes as social distancing continues. And finally, we all need a stiff drink. So whilst we adapt to virtual socialising, many of us are joining online social events such as concerts, as well as partying with friends and fams on house party, as Alex touched on earlier. The lack of face-to-face contact certainly doesn't seem to have dampened our spirits or enjoyment of a weekend alcoholic beverage. Looking at week commencing the 16th of March, we saw the wine, spirit and tobacco subsector up a huge 371% compared to the same week last year. It was Friday the 20th, which can be seen highlighted here, was the day the bars and restaurants were asked to close, and that's when consumers really began to stock up online, and we saw a 300% increase in orders of wine, spirits and cigarettes compared to the previous week. It's clear we all like a large glass of wine, but that's not the only thing keeping us entertained, and one online pharmacy also saw a 159% increase in condoms the day the sales that came through on AWIN. So that completes our 10 trends. I hope you found them interesting but also useful in helping to determine the best way to manage affiliate activity over the coming weeks and months. We will continue to dive into the AWIN data. We're publishing further articles and hosting webinars in the future, so do keep a lookout for the next ones. As mentioned at the beginning, we've now put aside some time to answer any questions you may have submitted about these 10 trends, or alternatively, if you've seen other trends or new activity across the affiliate space you'd like us to discuss, to let us know. If you haven't yet asked a question, as a reminder, you do so by using the small toolbar that appears in the middle of the screen and select the Show Q&A icon. A chat bar should open up the side for you to add your questions. I'll now hand back to Alex, who's going to moderate these for us.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone who's submitted a question so far. Do, if you haven't submitted one and you're not sure of one, do upvote the ones that are already asked to go in prioritize them. The first one is, I think it's more of a clarification question, but is the data just UK or global? So we've looked at data across UK advertisers here, but do look at the AWIN Coronavirus News Hub, and there will likely be sort of more data being published about global trends. And there's already a really sort of good Tableau report which shows you trends across different markets at the moment. So the most popular question at the moment is probably one for me actually, but it says, as COVID-19 is showing no signs of slowing down, do you anticipate mobile providers who are offering high data allowance packages to see a drop as more people are likely to be using Wi-Fi in their homes? So this is a really good question, and it's definitely one that we sort of consider. I've definitely considered and have spoken to a few providers about. I guess it's just considering what are the driving factors to people purchasing mobile devices. I think, yeah, potentially, obviously, not having the data or being frustrated with your existing phone or network is obviously a big driving factor. And I guess as people are using their mobile devices on Wi-Fi, I think potentially there's not going to be that sort of push factor to swapping your network provider. I think there's obviously the standard things of are you getting a good deal on your SIM card or on your pay monthly handset, and also obviously potential one-stop upgrading your phone. But I do think obviously it is harder to probably gain that traction as if people, as the data is showing on the AWIN data, people are using desktops more, so they may be just having less reliance on their phone. So I think potentially, yeah, high data allowances maybe just won't have as much of a pulling power at the moment, unless you're on maybe something that you already consider quite low. Now, I guess the thing to caveat there is it probably does depend if you're able to get a reliable internet connection over your Wi-Fi. So I know from speaking to colleagues who are on potentially older ADSL connections and they may be struggling to get fiber upgrades at the moment, they potentially are sort of using tethering more or using their phones as like primary source to do video calls and stuff with friends. But that's a really good question. We've got this question here, which I think is probably best to you, Joel. So are you seeing or are you expecting to see retailers close their online stores as they are unable to fill the increased consumer demand or want to protect their depot and delivery personnel?
Yeah, so we're definitely seeing this trend in some areas. So Groceries is obviously the most obvious one, and we've seen that a lot in the news recently, that some of these sites are having to go down or close for weekends to make sure that they can fulfill orders or put their sites on pause. We've obviously seen a couple of the niche sectors have to do this as well. So I mentioned earlier some of the sports equipment. We've also seen some seed retailers that have to pause just to really get to grips with the influx of orders that they're not used to dealing with before they're able to go back live again. And then we've seen a couple of retailers as well that have made decisions to shut as a business, not just on the high street, but also online, as alluded to in this question, it's definitely around protecting their overall business and protecting their staff. But I don't think any of these companies are making these decisions lightly.
Thank you for that, Joel. Another sort of telco-based question. So it's about, we anticipate the decline in broadband orders to continue into the early weeks of April following Openreach announcements? And the internet service providers who can offer free delivery and self-install are still available to drive new customer acquisition. So we're basically asking, where do we anticipate the market to go? I mean, it is an interesting point. Yeah, there is the ability, obviously, to buy new broadband and upgrade potentially in some instances with self-install. I guess it just depends whether a consumer is willing. So there's often, I think, that fear when you change providers that you'll lose internet for like a day. And although that obviously may be mitigated through self-install, I think it's just whether consumers are willing to potentially sort of do that. But I think, yeah, if you are struggling with your internet connection, I think there's probably still a need there. Having spoken to a few providers that I work with, I've definitely heard that I think one of their biggest concerns at the moment is just the operational side. So potentially they've got a reduced capacity in their call centers, and again are just being overwhelmed, I think, with a lot more sort of calls coming in. So I think operationally, some providers I've spoken to are definitely sort of talking about focusing more on their existing customers and just making sure they're able to service them to the best of their ability before focusing on new customer acquisition. So I think the market probably is going to obviously just be in a bit of a low period, but I guess, yeah, it will be interesting to just see how do providers respond to these restrictions, and is it a case that maybe you can swap your line over to a different provider and then upgrade to fiber once Openreach is available. So as said, yeah, that's quite an interesting point there. So we've got this one here, which is, are consumer journeys changing and are certain publisher types benefiting or losing from it? Roz, I don't know if you wanted to pick this one up.
Yeah, sure. So we are actually seeing changes in the publisher types driving activity across the network. We're seeing increases in social content. We're seeing increases in comparison sites, particularly those that work across the telco sector. And we are generally seeing declines across cashback and incentive in particular, and also small declines across the voucher code space. So there is definitely a shift in what's going on across the publisher base as well.
Thank you. So there's another question here, which says, with some retailers pausing their affiliate programs, what does AWIN recommend to pull back on spend? Roz or Joel, do you want to jump in on this one?
Yeah, sure. It's a tricky question, and it's a balancing act of wanting to support both publishers and advertisers during this really unprecedented time. I think wherever possible, we're having conversations with the advertisers about what the different options are, and I think where the channel can offer good return on investment and is data light, and obviously the relationship with the publishers, we're not a stop-start channel in the way that you can be with other online advertising mediums like display or search. So we're having conversations with them about what other activity they're looking at, where we can support them, and making sure that if they really feel reducing commissions or pausing activity for a short amount of time is the only way they can do, and that has sometimes come down from board level, and the teams we talk to haven't been able to change their minds, that we're giving publishers enough notice and that we're in constant communication with those advertisers about next steps and how we can support them to get back live as soon as possible, if it is possible.
And then I think on a related note, there's a question here about where a retailer actually makes the decision to cease trading. So the example they've given here is Next. Is there any recommendations that we'd suggest in how they should communicate this to their publishers?
So it's a good question. So I think that the next example, as you said, they wanted to cease trading completely. I think when that's the case and the website's not going to be functioning, we obviously have to just work in the timelines that they've set out that's going to happen. We'd always advise advertisers to give as much notice as possible to publishers, and when they can't give the recommended amount of notice, which is minimum 7 days, we usually ask for. On standard it's 30. Sometimes that's just not possible in these really unprecedented times, so we just really support the advertiser in that comms, making sure that it goes out in a number of different ways, and talking to publishers where possible directly across the account management teams to make sure they get that message so that they can alter promotions accordingly.
We have a question here about consumer traffic that we're seeing trying to push travel insurance despite the current climate. So I think like looking at it, I think similar to obviously the fallen interest in travel, I think, yeah, there has been, I think initially after the pandemic, I think there was a lot of consumer traffic to travel insurance, but I think as it's become more apparent that I guess sort of any sort of new policies won't cover the sort of coronavirus pandemic, I think we definitely are now seeing that fall, and I think it's very much travel insurance is very much tied to the travel sector, which at the moment, as I said, we're definitely seeing like a big sort of pausing in activity. Now, I don't know if Joel elaborated on this, but I have seen personally, obviously, like some travel brands starting to just go and put out some offers for the future. So potentially, obviously, later this year and maybe people will start thinking a little bit about travel insurance then. But again, I think the number one driver based on our data that sort of drove people to really sort of think about purchasing as much travel insurance as possible was the pandemic, as opposed to any of the other reasons that people normally book for. We have a question about whether this presentation will be available to download. So the webinar is being recorded, so the webinar will be available to download, which will include obviously the slides alongside obviously the commentary there. We've got a question from Ryan, who says, great insights in the telco sector. Do we have any insights into the energy sector? I assume that consumers are taking stock of their utilities. So yeah, we haven't actually had sort of the ability to do a sort of similar deep dive into the energy sector there, but it's definitely one that we can sort of look at. And as I said, if we get some interesting trends, we'll definitely post it on the Coronavirus News Hub. I guess, it's similar to obviously any sort of, I guess, pay monthly products, it'd be that telco, mobile, and home and insurance and stuff. I guess, consumers are probably thinking a little bit about their sort of outgoings at the moment. So potentially people will maybe think a little bit more about optimizing and sort of doing some life admin, so to say. Here's another question: is consumer spending expected to decrease due to higher job insecurity during this time? Joelle, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, sure. I suppose common sense, I'd make the assumption that it would. I can see that the consumer confidence index as we entered 2020 was up for the first time in several months, and we've seen that dips again, obviously, as a result of what's happening at the moment. I think we saw from consumers' reaction throughout the whole month around groceries and stockpiling on those products that people are in panic, and it will change their behaviours. I think we've been quite fortunate in the UK with the government guidelines around supporting as many workers as they can from a financial perspective, but it will definitely be a difficult time for our economy, and I definitely think we'll see consumer spend online dip as a result of that.
Thank you very much for that. We've got a question here which is about influencers. So do you think influencers will play a bigger part now that everyone is at home glued to Instagram? And is anything additional that we're doing to?
Yeah, so this is a really nice question, actually. Even at AWIN as a business, we've launched our own Instagram just for staff to keep each other entertained, to share pictures and to share live workout updates. I think we've also seen a lot of content from Instagram on the news. So I know we mentioned Joe Wicks earlier, but lots of Instagrammers seem to be taking the forefront at this time, and people who usually run customer-facing businesses that now the only way in which they can interact and stay in front of their customers is on most of the social media platforms. So I think it has been a really nice time, and we've seen, I suppose, in previous months, we've seen social media take a bit of a negative press, but this month it certainly feels like we're using the platform for the better. At AWIN, we have a dedicated influencer specialist. We also use a specific platform that allows us to measure not only last click CPA sales results, but also customer engagement, comments, likes, shares, and general follows. So we're definitely always on top of that space. We also work tirelessly with the account management teams from a content perspective to make sure that we have a really nice balance of content partners across programs, and the opportunity marketplace as well, which allows those influencers specifically to talk to our account management teams and advertisers directly about some of the content opportunities that they can offer.
So this one might be one for you, Ros. It's how are we seeing are we seeing any trends with new merchants at the moment? So is it been negative or positive if we look at newer merchants, and if not, is there any way that we can provide sort of merchant insight to publishers?
Yes. So in terms of new merchants going live, across the network, we've got to focus on supporting SMEs and what we're sort of calling micro SMEs, so the really long tail of business. And we've actually launched a new proposition to support them called Access. And We're looking at how we can make sure we're reacting really quickly to this and to those sectors that we're seeing doing well and we think might benefit from having further reach and being able to make sure that they're really supporting UK customers to be able to get them on the network really quickly and easily. So we are working with the advertisers across some of the sectors that we've mentioned here today in terms of the home gym side of things, hobbies, craft, to see if there's new ones that we can make sure we get up and running quickly.
Yeah, as I would say as well is just sort of plugging, I guess, the coronavirus news hub there. As I said, there is a report which shows sort of trends across different sectors and subsectors there. So if you, I think I don't know if it works super well on a mobile. So if you access it on a desktop, there you get quite a nice filterable report, and it covers a number of markets, including the UK. So that's often a really good way to go. And if you're a publisher, to go and look at maybe some emerging sectors that are sort of coming out of, I guess, the sort of changes in society at the moment. Here's a question here, which is, says, are there any concerns network-wide about further measures around essential items or delivery networks being restricted by the government? Joelle, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, of course. I suppose naturally we are concerned. We operate in the online market space, so any further measurements about shutting down essential, non-essential businesses, or also, as you suggested, specific delivery networks is going to be a concern for us and for our clients and for our publishers. We haven't seen anything specific in the press at the moment that demonstrates that this could happen. My assumption is that the government will continue to try and keep this stuff as open as far as they can to make sure that it doesn't impact our economy and unnecessarily. So yeah, it's fingers and toes crossed from me on this one at the moment.
I think we've got a follow-up question here, which is I think related to the answer I gave on broadband, which says the focus on existing customers compared to new acquisitions, and do we think there's still an opportunity for new registrations? So I guess competitors not able to fulfill orders. And I guess, yeah, the answer is yes. I think if you're maybe not having the sort of issues there, right, and you are able to push for new acquisitions, I don't see a harm in doing so. I guess it's just obviously being cautious and making sure that the messaging is right. But yeah, as I said, people are so much more reliant on the internet, and you are spending a lot of time getting to know the nooks and crannies of and then maybe the ups and downs of your internet connection. So if you are able to offer a product which you think will benefit consumers, I do think that selling the value of your sort of telecoms product there is something that would be really good. And as I said, there are some really interesting products out there. I know that there's as I said, there is obviously traditional home products, but I know that there obviously are pushes into 4G and 5G broadbands, and I think BT and potentially a few others have products which combine Wi-Fi with 4G. So I think it is an interesting point there, and I do think there is an opportunity there. I think it's just about taking sort of a very measured approach there. This one is a general one, so I guess we can go around and say maybe what our thoughts are. But are there any info on what we're now expecting to see in the coming weeks? So Joelle, I don't know if you wanted to maybe put your perspective in terms of travel and retail for that, and I'll do telco and finance.
Sure. Unfortunately for travel, without wanting to feel like a pessimist, we do know that government advisors advised against all global worldwide travel at the moment, and so coming weeks feels a bit too soon for us to be forecasting any positive movement in that space. I think we might have to wait a little bit further until we start to see movement there. However, in the retail landscape, things really are changing on a day-by-day basis at the moment. I think where the government restrictions have changed and got stricter over the last coming weeks, we've really seen a shift in the retailers that are performing and the subsectors that we're seeing coming through. I think government advice is unlikely to change much for the next coming weeks now that we are in lockdown, and we expect this lockdown for several weeks. So those trends might seem to normalise slightly in terms of how we run our lives day to day, but we'll still continue to see those sectors up that we're seeing at the moment. So the likes of groceries, pet care, and the sort of stuff that we do need essentially to run our day-to-day lives. I think we might start to see some sectors slow down that have seen an immediate boom. So things like home workout equipment and office supplies. Once consumers have started to stock that, it's not something they need to continue to repeat purchase. But hopefully we'll see a continued increase in the likes of DIY and home and garden whilst we do have people at home, and the sunshine is coming out as well.
Just to add to that, Joelle, in terms of the retail sector and online shopping more generally, I think what these really unfortunate circumstances have forced people to go online, and that, what we'll have to see how that pans out over the next few weeks. And as the questions have highlighted, that we could see more issues in terms of delivery and fulfillment and potential stock issues. But in terms of the long-term outcome, people are shopping online that didn't shop online before. And I think, once we do get through this crisis, I think that can hopefully only be positive for all of us long term.
Yeah, exactly that. I think there's actually quite a few questions that have come in, so I'm not sure we're going to be able to take that many more questions if we're going to finish on time, but I think there are quite a few questions about what are the long-term impacts of the pandemic. So I think there's references obviously of the fact that with Italy they're seeing the flattening of the curve, but there's also, I guess, the long-term impacts of the sector. And as Ros said, I think there is obviously, I think more people are obviously turning to online stuff. I don't think my parents had ever used video chat on their phone before, for example, and they're relying on that a lot more. I think it's the same with online groceries and a number of sectors where people are having to replace, I guess, what they traditionally maybe would have done offline with online opportunities. I think, within telco and finance, I think obviously finance, maybe there may be a rethink of, obviously, I think that you have to have a look at obviously like risk and stuff. Obviously, we haven't had a pandemic in the modern era that sort of has had the impact on insurance. So I think there'll obviously potentially be a rethink on how do those products maybe adjust a little bit. But I think within telco, as I said, personally, I didn't think that, I thought 5G was going to sort of start growing this year, but I didn't think it really had a killer application. However, like potentially there will be just changes in terms of, because we are spending so much more time with devices and things like that. So maybe, for example, maybe no one will want to go back to doing normal voice calls and text messages. Maybe everyone will always want to do video calls. And I think maybe that will be a bigger use case for something like 5G. As that sort of becomes more available. I think we've got time for another two more questions then. We've got one which is, has Awin seen any retailers ramp up spend, whether tenancy based or CPA based? I guess obviously as a sort of a pay per sale channel, I guess that the retailers that are seeing sort of spikes and increases, I guess, are spending more, but it's obviously still tied to their CPA. Joelle and Ros, I don't know if you've had any specific examples of any retailers who potentially are increasing activity within the channel at the moment, outside of just natural spikes.
Yeah, in the last couple of weeks or so, it's definitely been some of the high street retailers who have had to close stores, and so online is their only sort of avenue to bring in those sales and revenue. So they are really trying to get at the forefront of consumers everywhere they can, both existing and potential new customers.
I guess the final question is, will there be more of these webinars as the climate constantly changes?
Yes, we hope there definitely will be. And it's great to get all of your questions so we can get a bit of a steer on the climate and types of insights you'd like to see for next time. So thank you very much for submitting them all. For any questions that were submitted that we haven't answered, we will try and reply via the text platform, potentially obviously asking maybe for an email address, so we can do a follow-up on today's questions. But I'll hand it back over to Ros to close off the webinar. Thank you. Well, I think it's really just a chance for me to say thank you again for joining us. If you'd like any further information, you can see the contact details on screen. So UK-clientpartnerships@awin.com, that will get through to myself, Joelle and Alex. And then, as we mentioned, we've got our dedicated coronavirus hub, which you can find on the news and events section of the Awin site /coronavirus. So thank you very much again and goodbye.